Morning broke like any other on the dead-end street where Gervásio lived, a 68-year-old man whose name no one bothered to say out loud anymore. Retirement had come a decade earlier, the marriage had ended at a cold funeral, and the children, if they ever existed, had left no trace on the yellowed walls of that house the world seemed to have forgotten. The roof tiles creaked in the soft wind of dawn, and a crackling old radio, tuned to some random station, filled the living room with news Gervásio no longer listened to. He let them play. He lived in silence, the kind that would be unbearable for most, but for him it had become familiar, almost comfortable. Only one presence remained constant, one that never asked questions, never demanded answers, and knew exactly where to lie down to warm the loneliness of an old man. Timur, a tabby cat with amber eyes, a stretched-out body, and footsteps as quiet as dust in sunlight. Timur had been adopted 5 years ago, still a trembling kitten inside a cardboard box, abandoned behind the market. From that day on, he stayed, a silent companion, never loud, never intrusive, but always alert. On that specific morning, the smell of brewed coffee was the same. The kettle whistled right on time. Gervásio's trembling hand repeated the ritual of pouring kibble into the little white bowl by the fridge, but Timur didn't move. Perched on the counter, the cat just stared. His eyes shimmered brighter than usual, locked on the old man's face, as if searching for something new, a line, a breath, a crack. He didn't meow, didn't ask for food, didn't brush against his legs like every other morning. He stayed frozen, tail slightly curled, ears turned to the rhythm of Gervásio's breath, as if listening to something no one else could hear. And he was. He listened not with ears, but with instinct. With that ancient sense humans forgot how to use. Something wasn't right. Timur knew it. He didn't understand it, but he knew. Gervásio looked more tired than usual, his shoulders bent under the weight of something invisible, and the hand holding the coffee cup trembled like a seismograph catching the first waves of a coming disaster. But he said nothing, called for no one, just drank slowly, eyes fixed on the fluttering curtain, ignoring the tightening in his chest, a squeeze that felt like an embrace he wanted to escape. Timur, in his silent wisdom, kept watching, and in that split second, between one sip and the next, something changed. Gervásio's breath faltered, his eyes clenched in pain. The cup fell and shattered like a mute siren, and then the old man collapsed, limp, pale, his mouth ajar. Timur jumped down from the counter at the exact moment Gervásio's body hit the rug. He rushed to him, sniffed his face, tapped the man's chest with his paw, then recoiled, 2 steps back, and released a strange sound, a low, drawn-out meow, heavy with urgency, a sound he had never made before. It wasn't hunger, it wasn't routine. It was an animal alarm. Timur stood before something he couldn't explain with words, but recognized with his soul. His human's body was failing. The warmth of life was slipping away, and no one knew. No one but him. The kitchen clock read 6:02 a.m. when Gervásio got out of bed, just like he had done every morning for decades, even though there was no longer anyone to wake up for. His bones cracked in protest against the morning cold, and every step was a reminder of the age piling up in his joints like roadside dust. He shuffled into the kitchen with its old stained tiles, lit the burner with effort, and placed the kettle on to boil. It was the unchanging ritual that gave his days some kind of shape. The smell of brewing coffee was, for him, the only proof he was still alive. But something about this morning felt different. Timur, usually so calm and predictable, wasn't waiting by the kitchen door with his tail raised high as he always did. He was perched atop the cabinet, curled up tight, wide-eyed, breathing fast, as if he had sensed something humans weren't built to perceive. Gervásio noticed the odd behavior and muttered, "What's up, Timur? You smell rain coming?" But the cat didn't answer with his usual meow or a rub against his owner's legs. He remained frozen, eyes locked on Gervásio's every move with a gaze that bordered on supernatural. Gervásio placed his cup on the table, poured the coffee, and slowly sat down. As he raised his arm to reach for the sugar bowl, he felt a sharp jab in his chest, a sudden piercing pain that vanished as quickly as it came. He frowned, wiped his shirt like trying to rub the discomfort away, and took a deep breath. "Just gas," he murmured to himself, like a man trying to convince his own body not to betray him. From the top of the cabinet, Timur narrowed his eyes, lowered his ears, and tapped his tail slowly against the wood, as if to say, "Something's wrong." Gervásio ignored the warning. He kept drinking his coffee, trying not to notice the tremor crawling through his left hand. As he lifted the final spoonful to his mouth, a chill ran down his spine. At that exact moment, Timur jumped, silently, and landed beside him on the table, something he had never did. The cat hated being near food, but that day, something stronger had pulled him closer. His round amber eyes locked with the old man's. No purring, no sound, just a stare, one of those that doesn't need words to speak. Gervásio, unsettled, gave a crooked smile and muttered, "You're on edge today, huh, little guy?" But when he stood to carry the empty cup to the sink, the pain returned. And it wasn't like before. It was different. It was overwhelming, crushing, as if something inside him had been ripped away by an invisible chain. His left arm went numb. Sweat burst across his forehead, running in thick drops despite the morning chill. He staggered, tried to steady himself on the chair, but his fingers failed. Timur leapt to the floor the very second the cup shattered against the tiles, the crash muffled by the dull thud of Gervásio's body collapsing onto the living room rug. Timur rushed to him, sniffed his sweaty face, pressed his nose against his owner's, and immediately knew the smell was wrong. Too hot, acidic, desperate. The man's heart was pounding fast and weak, arrhythmic. Gervásio's half-open eyes fluttered. Timur stepped back 2 paces and let out a sharp, broken sound, something between a howl and a cry. It was the beginning of what would become his call for help, a sound he had never made before, as if something primal, ancient, had awoken inside him. The hunter's instinct had shifted into that of a guardian. Gervásio's body lay sprawled on the floor like a fallen tree in the silence of the forest, and the only sound left in that room was the uneven, fragile breath slipping through his lips, as if life itself were hesitating to stay. His face had flushed into a bluish-purple hue, and his half-closed eyes seemed to fight against the weight of his pain, trying to stay open but losing the battle. Timur, who until that moment had never strayed from his feline pattern of quiet observation, stepped into a role no human could have predicted. Sentinel, guardian, responder. He approached the man's chest and lay down against it, pressing his warm body to him as if trying to keep the flame inside from dying. But when he realized it wasn't working, the cat sprang up with a jolt, and what followed was an explosion of instinct that would make any scientist question what they truly knew about animal intelligence. First, Timur dashed to the living room door, locked as always. He clawed at the wood with fury, unleashing sharp, violent meows that sliced through the heavy morning air. Nothing. He ran back to Gervásio, circled around him, and tried to bite the sleeve of his shirt as if attempting to drag him. The man, barely conscious, let out a faint moan. Timur leapt onto the back of the couch, and from there reached for the curtain covering the window. With claws out, he tugged with force, tearing the fabric and sending the iron rod crashing to the ground with a thundering noise that echoed through the house, but no one heard it. The neighbors still slept, or drowned in their own deaf routines, completely unaware of the silent emergency unfolding in that forgotten room. And then, Timur made a drastic decision. He ran into the kitchen, climbed onto the sink, and looked up at the small ventilation window above. It was the only possible escape. He had never left the house alone. Gervásio had always protected him, kept him indoors, away from the dangers of the outside world. But now Timur knew. If he wanted to save him, he'd have to break the rule. He pushed the glass with his head until it gave way after several attempts. The gap was tight, but Timur slid through with the grace of survival. In seconds, he was outside, in the cold, wet, unfamiliar backyard. The world out there was bigger, louder, filled with aggressive scents, but none of it stopped him. Timur bolted to the gate, but it was locked. Instead of giving up, he climbed a forgotten stack of bricks by the wall, balanced like a shadow across the wooden planks, and leapt into the neighbor's yard, the yard of Mrs. Irina, the woman who hadn't exchanged more than a polite good morning with Gervásio in years. Timur hit the bare ground and ran straight to her living room window. She was inside, sewing in silence. He planted himself in front of the glass and began pawing at it. Not once, not twice, but again and again, hard, fast, like a creature possessed. His eyes were burning, his breath short, and his meows, those meows, were unlike any sound a common cat would ever make. They were somewhere between a cry and a plea, as if he were saying, in a language no animal was supposed to speak, "Come now or he dies." At first, Mrs. Irina just stared. She found it strange, bizarre even. Cats don't act like that. Cats don't beg. But Timur didn't stop. He headbutted the glass, cried again, and then, in a rare act of desperation, hurled himself against the window screen, clinging to it with his claws. His face pressed against the glass, eyes locked into hers, and something in that gaze made her heart pound. There was a plea in it, a warning, a call. Irina, trembling, removed her glasses, stood up, and walked toward the gate that separated her yard from Gervasio's. The handle turned easily, as if fate had forgotten to lock it. She stepped inside. Timur ran ahead, guiding her like he knew every step, like his mission had reached its final turning point. And when she crossed the neighbor's doorway, she saw. She saw the body on the floor, the pale skin, the failing breath. And then she screamed. But when he realized it wasn't working, the cat jolted upright and began to move with a restlessness that bordered on the supernatural. Timur circled Gervasio's body like he was trapped in an ancient instinct, a ritual rooted deep in the bones of his species. He would stop for seconds at a time, press his nose to the man's mouth, pat his shoulder with a paw, then sprint to the living room door where he stood on his hind legs, clawed at the wood, and let out a long, raspy meow that echoed off the walls like a desperate alarm. The sound was soaked in urgency, but also in dread. He knew he was alone. He knew the man on the floor wouldn't get up by himself, but he didn't know how to call for help, only that he had to do something, and quickly. Timur ran to the window, leapt onto the sill, and peered outside. The street was empty, as it always was at 7 in the morning. A garbage truck was turning the corner, too far away to hear a sound coming from this house wrapped in metal bars and silence. The cat jumped back down, circled the old man again, and sniffed the air. The smell of cardiac arrest was thick, metallic, heavy. Gervásio no longer had the strength to cry out. His eyes were half closed, his mouth barely open in a minimal effort to inhale what little air his lungs could manage. His left arm twitched, but no longer lifted. Timur approached his face and licked his forehead. The temperature was off. Everything was off. And it was then that Timur understood, in the only way an animal can truly understand. He had to leave that house. He had to find someone. He had to alert the world beyond the walls. With one swift jump, the cat climbed onto the kitchen counter, pushed the curtain aside with his paw, and stared at the small ventilation window above the sink. He pressed against the glass with his nose, feeling its resistance against his skull until a narrow gap opened. Timur hunched down, tensed his muscles, and slid through the tight space. Even though he had never left the house alone, had never walked the streets, had never faced the world outside those walls. But this wasn't about comfort anymore. It was about saving Gervásio. As soon as he landed in the backyard, Timur bolted, fur bristling, tail high, ignoring the damp earth, the dry leaves, the foreign sounds he'd never heard so clearly. He had one target, the house next door, Irina's house, the woman who always peeked through the curtain, the woman who had never set foot inside Gervasio's home, but always knew he lived there with that quiet cat. Timur jumped onto the wall, pounded his paws against the kitchen window, and let out the loudest cry he had ever managed, a desperate sound, and he stayed there, hitting, calling, screaming, and on the other side of the glass, a curtain moved. The curtain moved slowly, and behind it emerged the thin, cautious face of Mrs. Irina, a 72-year-old woman long accustomed to living in seclusion, her only constant companions being the television and the rosary hanging above her bed. She had never been close to Gervásio. They exchanged timid waves at the gate, sometimes a word or two about the weather or how the street had grown increasingly empty over the years, but nothing more. Still, she knew Timur. She knew that cat never ventured beyond his yard, that he was quiet, graceful, invisible, just like his owner. That's why, when she saw him there, outside her kitchen window, eyes wide, front paws striking the glass with an unnatural fury, something in Irina's chest skipped a beat. She frowned, stepped back, and just stared, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. But Timur didn't stop. It was as if every second mattered. And it did. His movements were urgent, repetitive, relentless. accompanied by sharp, piercing meows that broke the morning silence like sirens. Something was wrong, screamed every trembling muscle in that desperate feline body. Timur slammed his head against the glass, scraped his claws with such force that pieces of the window film tore away. His breath fogged the glass, and his eyes didn't blink. They pleaded, they begged. It wasn't the gaze of an animal. It was the cry of a soul that somehow understood that every second was stealing from his human the chance to survive. And in that moment, something inside Irina broke free. Without fully knowing why, she pushed the window open, unlocked the kitchen door, and stepped outside with hurried steps, heart pounding. Timur leapt from the windowsill and darted ahead of her, racing across the side garden and vanishing through the ajar gate of Gervásio's house. Irina hesitated. What if it's a trap, she thought. What if he just ran away? But the doubt didn't last. Instinct, the same one Timur was following, spoke louder. She stepped inside. The house smelled of cold coffee, old newspapers, and something else. Something metallic, dense, that she couldn't identify right away. Timur stood in the center of the living room, staring at the floor, and when Irina followed his gaze, she saw it. Gervasio's body lying on the rug, eyes half open, mouth parted, chest rising and falling in slow, tortured rhythm. His lips had turned a strange color, bluish, and it chilled Irina to her core. And in that instant, without a second thought, she screamed, a high-pitched, shattering scream that cut through the street and bounced off the walls like a flare. She rushed to the landline on the small table, dialed emergency services with trembling fingers, and barely managed to get the words out. It's the neighbor, Mr. Gervásio. He's collapsed on the floor. I think he's dying. His cat called me. The cat called me. For God's sake, come quick. While Irina trembled at the phone, Timur never left his human side. He sat beside Gervasio's chest and remained there, unmoving, unwavering, a sentinel on duty. He listened to every breath, watched every twitch. His eyes never looked away. His body never relaxed. He didn't know what a heart attack was. He didn't know what an ambulance meant. But he knew. He had done his part. That morning, as the neighborhood slowly began to wake, car engines turning over, sleepy children being dragged off to school, and the baker dropping off loaves on the corner, a tabby cat with piercing eyes and dust-covered paws had just accomplished the impossible. Timur, until that day just another domestic pet in the eyes of the world, had made a decision that even many humans would hesitate to make, to abandon his instinct for self-preservation, to ignore the fear of the unknown, and to leap beyond his little world of windows and carpets, all to save the one who, to him, was more than a master. He was the thread between his past and his present, the only being who had ever given him a home, a name, and a silent place in which he had learned to simply exist. The escape through the kitchen window hadn't been easy. Timur wasn't a street cat. He wasn't used to the cold bite of metal, nor to the force needed to push open the tiny glass hatch. But something deep inside him, maybe a sixth sense, maybe some primal memory, told him that this was the only way. He leapt onto the sink with feline precision, skidded across the marble, found his balance and pressed his head against the glass, pushing with all his weight until he heard a beep, sharp click. The small pressure lock gave way, and the gap opened. Timur tucked his body, tail stiff, eyes squinted to avoid the glass. He slid through the narrow space like a shadow, claws scraping the frame, until his whole body passed through, and he dropped into the yard's packed dirt. The landing made him roll, but he was up in seconds. The air outside was different, heavier, louder, more unpredictable. The smells came from every direction: wet earth, engine oil, garbage, other animals. Timur scanned his surroundings, alert. Gervasio's yard was surrounded by high walls, but there was one weak spot, a stack of bricks left behind from an unfinished renovation. Without a moment's thought, he climbed the unstable mound, slipping twice before reaching the top of the wall. The leap to the other side was risky, but he jumped. He landed in Mrs. Irina's yard like a feline shadow on a mission. The grass was wet, the ground slippery. Timur dashed to her kitchen window, leapt onto the sill, and then he began to scream. If a cat can truly scream. The sounds coming from his throat were sharp, anguished, unnatural. So much so that Irina, sitting in her living room, stood up at once. Timur slammed the glass with his front paws, scratched at the pane, hurled himself against it. He hissed, he meowed, one sound after another without pause, as if shouting in some urgent universal language. Something is wrong. He's down. He's dying. Come. Irina opened the window, still confused, but Timur didn't wait for questions. He jumped back down and sprinted to the gate, turning to look back, waiting for her to follow. And she did. Wearing slippers, hair tied back in a low bun, hands trembling, Irina crossed the space between houses driven by a kind of faith you don't learn in church. Timur stopped at the front door, looked at her one last time, and let out a single meow, dry, short, absolute, like a final period before the end. Irina pushed the door. It wasn't locked. Maybe fate, too, was helping. And when she stepped inside, she saw the body. Gervásio lay there, eyes half closed, breath shallow. Timur was already back at his side, as if saying, "I brought help. Hold on. I came back." For Mrs. Irina, that image would remain etched in her memory until the final breath of her life. A man collapsed on the living room rug, lips tinged blue, eyes fighting to stay open, and beside him a cat. That same silent, invisible cat she'd always seen from afar, now sitting still like a striped guardian angel with watchful eyes. The initial shock froze her in place. For a moment, her mind tried to deny what it saw. It was too early for tragedy, too early for death, but Gervásio's body left no room for doubt. Something serious was happening, and there was no time for hesitation. Irina ran to the house phone, dialed emergency with trembling fingers, and cried to the operator, "It's a heart attack, I think. He's on the floor. Hurry, for the love of God." While the call was being made, Timur never stepped away. His eyes, now half-lidded, followed Gervásio's every breath like a living metronome, counting the seconds left with feline precision. The old man's chest rose and fell with painful effort. His skin was cold, the carpet soaked in sweat. Timur leaned closer, touched his nose to Gervásio's lips, and let out a soft, low meow, more whisper than sound. There was no panic in it, only awareness, only presence. They were silent, knowing that life was slipping away slowly, but by some miracle it still hadn't left. Beside them, Irina tried to keep it together. The ambulance had been dispatched, but the ticking clock had lost all logic. Each minute dragged like eternity, and the noise of the outside world became distant static. She knelt beside Gervásio, placed a hand on his forehead, and spoke with a voice both strong and soft. "Mr. Gervásio, can you hear me? I'm here. Hold on, okay? Help is coming. Don't close your eyes." Timur looked at her. For the first time, their eyes met with something deeper than curiosity, and in that shared gaze, a silent pact was made. No one would die today. The sound of a siren broke the silence like a blade. Irina stood and rushed to the gate, flinging it open and waving wildly at the approaching white ambulance. The paramedics jumped out. Stretcher, gear, urgent questions. How long since collapse? Any cardiac history? Is he breathing unassisted? Irina tried to answer, but there was something she couldn't quite explain. When one of the medics asked how she even knew the man needed help, she pointed to the floor, where Timur watched everything with alert eyes. "It was him, the cat. He called me. He brought me here." The medic paused, looked at the animal with disbelief, then asked, "You're saying the cat called for help?" Irina shook her head, voice trembling. "No, I'm saying the cat begged for help." The professionals took over. One placed an oxygen mask, another began chest compressions. Timur, now in a corner of the room, never moved farther than a few feet. He watched every movement, alert, as if tracking his human's heartbeat through sheer will. When they lifted Gervásio onto the stretcher and secured his body gently, Timur approached once more, slow, steady steps, and pressed his forehead to the old man's fingers. A small gesture, a touch, but to anyone watching, it would have looked like a temporary goodbye. Irina was in tears. The paramedics didn't understand what exactly had happened, but one thing was certain to everyone in that room. If that cat hadn't done what he did, Gervásio would be dead. And Timur knew that. Knew it with the kind of wisdom that doesn't come from books or speech. It comes from silence, from companionship, from a loyalty forged across long winters and lonely afternoons, when there were only two souls in the world, an old man and a cat who, even in silence, always listened. Inside the ambulance, the monitors began to emit steady, hesitant beeps, the fragile rhythm of life refusing to let go. Gervásio, though unconscious, was still fighting. His weakened heart battled the edge of collapse, and behind his half-closed eyelids flickered the faintest signs of consciousness. Timur, outside, sat quietly on the sidewalk, just a few feet from the vehicle, watching with the focus of something far more than a pet, more like a guardian tending to a nest. The paramedics, meanwhile, were still trying to process what they had just witnessed. Irina's voice echoed in their minds like a puzzle too strange to dismiss with easy skepticism. "The cat called me." The youngest of the team shook his head with a cynical smile. "She's confused, probably heard a noise and thought it was the cat." But the oldest one, the one with more than 20 years of field experience, stayed silent. He glanced at Timur, gave a subtle nod and murmured, "Maybe." He knew. Irina remained standing, rosary between her fingers, watching as the emergency procedures were finalized inside the ambulance. And there, in front of the growing crowd of onlookers, she recounted what she had seen, in detail. The cat at the window, the relentless meowing, the unnatural behavior, the way he launched himself against the glass as if trying to break through the world's indifference. Some neighbors laughed, skeptical. Others, the more intuitive ones, said nothing. But there was a growing certainty among them. Timur hadn't done that by accident. He wasn't just a frightened animal. He was a witness, a messenger, a living alarm. Timur, for his part, allowed no one to touch him. Not Irina, not the bystanders, not even the medics. When the ambulance drove off with his human inside, he stood up and ran after it for a few meters, stopping only when the vehicle turned the corner and disappeared. He remained there, chest heaving, tail stiff, like a sentinel left behind. The world, which until that morning had been made of walls, furniture, and quiet routines, now felt too open, too loud, too uncertain. Timur didn't know where to go. He only knew one thing. He couldn't go back into that empty house. Irina tried to approach. She knelt with effort and called out to him, "Come, Timur. Come on, sweetheart. He's going to be okay." Her voice trembled, and deep down she knew she was saying it more to herself than to the cat. Timur hesitated for a few seconds. Then he looked one last time toward the gate through which the stretcher had disappeared, and slowly walked over to her porch. There he curled up under the shade of the cement bench and lay still, eyes fixed on the road. It was as if he were saying, "I've done my part. Now, I wait." At that moment, it was still just a neighborhood rumor. But it would only take one post, a shaky phone recording from Irina, a clip of that meow accidentally captured, and the story would begin to spread like wildfire. And when that happened, when the video of Timur pawing at the window hit the internet, the world would understand what the neighbors didn't at first. That interspecies communication does exist, that invisible bonds can be stronger than words, and that sometimes what saves us isn't the scream but the right silence at the exact right time. The living room floor was still damp with Gervásio's cold sweat, the rug absorbing not only the moisture of a body in crisis, but also the weight of the moment that had just passed. The stretcher had left faint tracks across the old wooden boards, and the sound of the departing ambulance echoed like a distant hum in Irina's ears. Now she remained kneeling alone, in a house that wasn't hers, but for a brief moment had become her responsibility. Timur was there too, beside the couch, lying belly down, paws tucked under, eyes fixed on the door, as if willing the old man to return by force of thought. The air felt frozen. The wall clock read 8:24, but each second dragged like an eternity. Irina let out a deep sigh. She had never felt a presence so powerful coming from an animal. Timur didn't move. He didn't make a sound, but his posture was the purest form of loyalty she had ever seen. There was something in that silence that spoke louder than any scream. He didn't shake. He didn't cry, but he was fully present, as if saying, "I know, I understand, and I'm staying." Around them, the house began to stir. The forgotten kettle hissed faintly from the kitchen. The living room lights flickered with the unstable morning current, but none of that pulled Timur away. He wouldn't move, not until he knew his human was coming back. Outside, Irina was no longer just a neighbor. She had become a guardian, a witness, and now, by the force of circumstance, a caretaker. But she hesitated. Though she loved animals, she had never owned one. And this one was different. Timur felt ancient. There was something in those amber eyes that carried pain, memory, and a kind of love that humans often forget how to show. With careful steps, she approached him. She reached out a hand. Timur looked, but didn't flinch, didn't flee, didn't come closer. He simply remained. With quiet grace, Irina sat on the floor beside him. She said nothing. She leaned back against the couch and just stayed there, in silence. The sun was beginning to filter through the cracked window, bathing the room in soft golden light, casting long, gentle shadows across the floor. And then Timur did the unthinkable. He shifted just slightly and rested his head against Irina's foot. It was a small gesture, barely a movement, but for anyone who knew him, and she did now, it was like a thank you, silent acknowledgement, that in that moment he was no longer alone. The hours that followed were slow, heavy. The ambulance had taken Gervásio to the city hospital, but no word had come back yet. Irina brewed coffee, left out food for Timur, but he didn't touch it. His purpose wasn't to eat. His purpose was to wait. For 3 consecutive days he slept in the same spot where Gervásio had collapsed. He spent nights curled on the rug, days perched on the porch. He ignored noises, stray cats, chirping birds, and even the fresh bowls of food Irina left with such care. None of it mattered. His focus was elsewhere. His bond had been severed, and he was waiting for the moment it would reconnect. Irina noticed, and moved by something she couldn't quite name, she began documenting Timur's behavior. She filmed his daily walks to the door, how he stood up at the sound of passing cars, how he positioned himself at the front of the house, body tense, eyes sharp, how he returned crestfallen, each time hope proved false. And in one of those videos, simple, unedited, no background music, she wrote just one line: "This is my neighbor's cat. He saved his owner's life, and now he's been waiting for him for 3 days. Someone needs to see this." And the world did. Santa Efigenia's municipal hospital wasn't exactly built for miracles. Small, with peeling walls and a constant shuffle of emergency cases and stretched routines, the place survived more on the strength of its staff than on resources. And that's where Gervásio arrived, unconscious, pale, lips tinged with blue mid-heart attack. The doctors wasted no time. It was a textbook case of acute myocardial infarction, and every second counted. Between triage and surgery, the full emergency protocol went into motion: defibrillator, medication, stabilization. But there was one thing none of the professionals could understand. They all kept asking the same question: who found him? And every answer came with the same stunned look. It was the cat. The cat called for help. Meanwhile, 3 kilometers away, Timur remained at the doorstep, a living statue. The sun was beginning to set, casting the sky in hues of orange and purple, and the sidewalk where he sat had started to grow cold, but he didn't move. Irina brought food and water, called to him gently, but the cat stayed where he was, eyes locked on the road, ears tuned to the faintest sound of an engine. It was as if his heart had entered a state of permanent alert, waiting for the only sound that mattered: the deep rumble of the ambulance bringing the old man home. At the hospital, Gervásio was still alive, fragile, tubes in his arms, monitors tracking every heartbeat. He remained unconscious but stable, and when the surgeon finally completed the procedure, peeled off his blood-stained gloves and turned to the team, he said, if they'd arrived 5 minutes later, he wouldn't have made it. That's when the youngest nurse, eyes glassy and phone in hand, showed the video she'd just seen on the town's group chat, a tabby cat wailing desperately at a window with a kind of anguish most humans couldn't fake. The doctor stared at the screen. He said nothing, just stood there for a few seconds, then quietly muttered, he knew. Social media did what it does best. Irina's video had been shared more than 2,000 times in under 24 hours. Cat saves owner from heart attack. Feline miracle. 4-legged hero. The headlines spread like wildfire, from blogs to news sites to local morning shows. City reporters went to the house, interviewed Irina, filmed Timur sitting on the porch, indifferent to the fame, but alert to every passing car. A reporter got too close, and Timur stepped away with a wary glare. He wasn't there to give interviews. He was there to wait for Gervásio. And when, 3 days later, the gate finally opened and the van from the private clinic where the old man had been transferred pulled up, Timur knew. There was no announcement, no doorbell, but he knew. He stood with feline grace, walked calmly toward the vehicle, and before Gervásio could even step fully out, Timur leapt into his arms. Gervásio, pale, bandaged, weak, held the cat like a child and cried. Silent tears, face buried in Timur's fur, and Timur purred. But it wasn't just any purr. It was a purr of relief, as if to say, I held everything together while you were gone. Now I can breathe. The medical team stood in silence. A few journalists caught the moment on camera. Irina, leaning against the wall, clutched her rosary and smiled through tears. Because in that moment, everything made sense. There was no doubt left. That cat didn't just love his owner. He had saved his life. No training, no command, no words. Just the strength of a bond that doesn't need language to exist. The image of Gervásio and Timur's reunion spread across the country like a silent wildfire, igniting warmth and emotion wherever it reached. But behind the public outpouring, the story was far from its happy ending. Yes, Gervásio had survived the heart attack, but his condition demanded continuous care and constant medical monitoring. The bypass procedure had been a technical success, but his heart carried more than blocked arteries and damaged tissue. It carried the weight of years of loneliness, emotional neglect, and a world that had forgotten him while he stubbornly remained alive. And now, for the first time in decades, there was someone, or rather, something, refusing to let him go without a fight. During the first few days of hospitalization, Gervásio stayed in intermediate care. His heartbeat was still unstable, his body swollen from medication, his eyes barely open, as if his soul hadn't yet decided whether it wanted to remain. But with each visit from Irina, and especially with every video she showed of Timur lying on the rug, perched at the window, faithfully waiting, something began to shift inside the old man. A muscle that doesn't appear on cardiac exams, but may be the most vital of all, the will to go home. Irina never left him alone. She cared for Timur as if he were a grandchild. She learned his quiet habits, his refusal to eat when anxious, his daily pacing to the front gate, as if he were saying, let's go, it's time, he can come back now. And when Timur meowed once each day, always at exactly 10 a.m., Irina understood. That was the exact time Gervásio had collapsed. Timur never forgot. On the fourth night in the hospital, something changed. Gervásio, lying in his bed, whispered the cat's name. It was weak, barely audible, but the nurse beside him heard it. Timur. It was the first word he had spoken since the operation. The news spread among the staff like a breath of hope in a place used to pain. The head nurse asked for something personal from home. Irina brought one of the old man's favorite throw blankets, the one where Timur always curled up. When they laid it across Gervásio's chest, the heart monitor registered a slight increase. With a trembling hand, he pulled the blanket to his face and pressed it there. He didn't cry. He didn't need to. In that silent gesture lived everything words can't say: recognition, longing, love. The following days brought slow improvement. Gervásio began eating again, doing light exercises, forming short phrases. And every time he could, he'd ask, "Is he okay?" Irina answered with pictures, with stories, with daily reports. And Timur, he seemed to understand. Every time Irina said his owner's name, his ears perked up. He'd walk to the door, as if to say, "Now? Can I go now?" But always returned with his head down. It wasn't time yet. Not until the second week, after the latest EKG showed significant improvement and the scans confirmed stabilization, did the doctor give his verdict. He's ready to go home, but he'll need emotional support. He was alone for too long. And Irina, without missing a beat, replied, "He won't be alone anymore. Timur won't let him." Transportation was arranged. And as he entered the van that would take him back, still weak but eyes bright, Gervásio held close to his chest the fuzzy blanket that now carried a new scent, the scent of home, of fur, of loyalty. And so, at dusk, with the sky painted in tones of farewell and rebirth, Gervásio returned. And Timur, who hadn't meowed in days, let out a deep, low sound the moment he saw the man cross the gate. He launched from the ground in a flawless leap and threw himself into Gervásio's arms, who broke down in tears. He wept with his soul, wept not because he had survived, but because someone had wanted him to live. The gate creaked open slowly, as if it understood the symbolic weight of the moment. This was more than a simple return home. It was a rebirth. Old Gervásio, now with a paler face and trembling legs, crossed the yard with short but steady steps, supported by the van driver and the quiet emotion of Donna Irina, who waited with teary eyes. Timur, who had spent the last 11 days in a kind of silent vigil, rose at the first sound of wheelchair wheels touching the pavement, and when he saw that familiar figure entering, he didn't hesitate. With the lightness of a soul on a completed mission, he ran toward his human, without fear, without haste, only certainty. The impact of their reunion was overwhelming. No audience would ever be enough to hold the emotion that exploded in that yard. Timur leapt into Gervásio's lap in a precise arc, placing his front paws on the man's chest, who gasped between laughter and tears. The pain in his newly operated chest didn't matter, nor did the frailty. In that feline embrace, tight, tender, there was a force no scalpel or medicine could replicate. Gervásio caressed Timur's head with fingers still thin and trembling, and murmured with a hoarse voice, "You saved me, my boy. You saved me." Timur purred loudly, like a faulty engine trying to soothe the heart of the man who once rescued him as a dirty, sick kitten. It was the perfect exchange. One saved the other in different times with different methods, but the same deep, inexplicable feeling. Irina, standing by the gate, wiped her tears quietly, trying to control the quiver in her lips. She knew she was witnessing something rare, a type of reunion you don't see in movies but feel in your gut when it happens in real life. Inside the house, everything felt both the same and different. The armchair was still in its place. The old radio still hissed on AM. Timur's favorite blanket remained folded on the sofa, but now there was a new scent in the air, the scent of survival, of resilience, of a life that had almost slipped away. Gervásio sat down slowly, helped by Irina, and Timur immediately curled up at his side, just like he did before it all fell apart. There was no rush, no drama, only a soft silence, warm, tender, full of meaning. A silence that said, "We're back, and that's enough." Fawastis, and at that very moment, as the sun bid farewell through the cracks in the curtain, Gervásio finally understood what had truly happened. What Timur did for him wasn't just instinct, it was connection. It was devotion. It was the result of years in which neither spoke a word, but they shared every silence. Because in a world that so often forgets the elderly and ignores animals, they had chosen to care for one another. In the days that followed the reunion, something extraordinary began to happen, and this time it wasn't between Timur and Gervásio. It was between Timur and the world. The video recorded by Donna Irina, once considered just a local curiosity, now spread like dry fire across every corner of the internet. News outlets replayed the scene of the cat leaping onto the neighbor's window, meowing, scratching the glass like a desperate messenger, begging for something it couldn't express in words. The headline was always the same: "Cat saves owner from heart attack by calling for help in unbelievable way." Within hours, the national media was at the modest doorstep of Gervásio's home, requesting interviews, footage, and testimonies. Timur, unaware of his growing fame, watched it all with the same quiet serenity as always, but now his image was everywhere. TV shows wanted him live. Veterinarians and animal behavior experts debated the case in studio panels. "Cats are more sensitive to chemical changes in the human body than we realize," one explained. "Timur may have detected changes in body odor, signs of metabolic acidosis, or hormone fluctuations noticeable to feline olfaction." But others argued it wasn't just science, that it was an intuition, that it was a deep emotional bond, and Timur's behavior couldn't be explained by instinct alone. To many, it was love in its purest and most unexpected form. Gervásio, for his part, became a symbol, a man who survived death not because of a machine, but because of a cat. Sitting on the porch with Timur curled at his feet, he struggled to comprehend the magnitude of it all. Reporters handed him microphones, cameras filmed him, children clapped as he passed by, but he always repeated the same phrase with quiet humility. "It was him. I did nothing. Timur brought me back." His voice was steady, but his eyes always teared up, because no matter how many claps he received, the only applause that truly mattered was that low purr at his side every morning he woke up to live another day. Timur became known as the nurse cat, the feline angel, the four-legged hero. He was honored by the city hall, his face painted on a mural at a local school, and during a symbolic ceremony organized by an animal rights NGO, he was awarded a golden heart-shaped pendant. The moment went viral. Timur, in a brand new collar on Gervásio's lap, receiving his medal while purring non-stop. The auditorium stood in ovation. Some children cried, and the host of the event, voice trembling, said, "Today we honor not just an incredible animal, but the power of interspecies connection." And while his fame grew, Timur remained Timur. He slept in the same spots, ate from the same bowl, lay across Gervásio's belly whenever the man coughed or showed signs of weakness. He knew, with a wisdom beyond logic, that there was still fragility there, that the old man needed vigilance. So, he never let his guard down. At every strange noise, Timur rose. On colder nights, he snuggled closer, and every new morning it was him who gently nudged Gervásio's face with his forehead, as if saying, "Another day. We're still here." Timur's story became a children's book, a documentary, a case study in medical and neuroscience seminars. But more than anything, it became living proof that love can inhabit anybody, even one covered in fur with claws and silence. And while the world still tried to grasp how a cat had sensed a human heart attack and called for help, Gervásio, now stronger and calmer, summarized it all in a single sentence. He heard me when I wasn't even listening to my own body. The ceremony was set for a sunny Saturday at the city's cultural center. A simple event, but organized with the care of those who understood that this went far beyond a tribute. At the auditorium's entrance, a banner in large, colorful letters read, "Timur, the hero cat of Santa Efigenia." The public began gathering early in the morning. Children wore paper cat ears, elders held back tears, and young people had their phones ready to capture every second. It was as if the entire town had decided for a moment to stop everything to celebrate life, empathy, and the unexplainable that lives in the hearts of animals. Gervásio arrived in silence, dressed in a light button-down shirt and taking careful steps, supported by Irina and Timur himself, who walked solemnly at his side with a brand new red collar around his neck. The applause started the moment they appeared at the entrance. The old man bowed his head, shy, but the cat walked with grace, his stride light, tail high, eyes alert as always. Of course, he didn't understand the concept of awards, crowds, or ceremonies, but he recognized faces, and he knew that those hundreds of people weren't there for him, but for everything he stood for. The presenter, visibly moved, led the event with a steady voice. Today, the city of Santa Efigenia bows before an example of love and connection. A cat who went beyond instinct, who crossed windows, walls, and fear to save the one being he loved. Timur has no words, but his actions speak, and they saved a life. Then, a child came up to the stage holding a small velvet cushion. Upon it, a golden heart-shaped medal, engraved at the center, just one word, Guardian. Gervásio held Timur in his arms, with effort. The cat purred softly, but seemed aware that something solemn was happening. When the medal was placed around his neck, the crowd erupted in applause. Some cried, others shouted his name, and Gervásio, visibly emotional, brought the microphone to his lips with trembling hands and said only, "He didn't just save me from a heart attack, he saved me from loneliness." That was enough. No one needed to hear anything more. The ceremony continued with presentations by children who had drawn pictures inspired by Timur. Some depicted him saving Gervásio, others showed him wearing a superhero cape, but in all of them one thing was constant, a vigilant, loving, and loyal cat. Parents took photos, newspapers filmed from every angle, and social media exploded with videos of the four-legged hero receiving love and attention. But Timur only wanted one thing, to go home with his human and lie once again on that old rug, the one where by instinct he somehow knew everything would begin. On the ride home, Gervásio stroked the cat's neck and gently tapped the medal that now glistened in the fading afternoon light. Timur, lying in his lap, purred. It was a soft, deep sound, like a mantra that said, "It's all right now." Irina, in the front seat, discreetly wiped her eyes and looked in the rearview mirror at the old man petting the cat with a tenderness that bordered on sacred, and she thought to herself, "I've never seen two beings so different love each other so much." That night back at home, with the house quiet and the city still buzzing about the story, Timur lay on Gervasio's chest and stayed there in silence. The old man drifted to sleep, and his heart, now patched together by science, beat strong as ever. Timur listened to every beat like a reminder. It was worth it. I stayed. I fought. I did it. After the ceremony, the lives of Timur and Gervásio seemed to finally return to their purest form, the quiet of a modest home, the smell of morning coffee, the soft steps of a cat weaving between old furniture, and the constant presence of a bond that no longer needed to be proven. But while the two slowly resumed the routine, interrupted by the scare that nearly separated them, the world outside continued to watch. Timur was no longer just a house cat. Now he was being studied, analyzed, cited in academic articles and mentioned in symposia that once would never have given space to stories like his, because Timur had shattered an invisible barrier between science and sentiment. It was through his case that researchers from the regional federal university launched a pioneering project, mapping behavioral patterns in cats when humans experience health crises. The goal was to understand to what extent felines could detect subtle physiological changes, such as shifts in breathing, the scent of sweat, cardiac vibrations, or even the body's electrical signals. Timur began receiving frequent visits from biologists, veterinarians, and neurologists who closely observed his behavior, recorded his responses, tested his awareness. And in every report, one conclusion was always the same. Timur had an extraordinary sensitivity, but he never seemed to care about the attention. He continued living his life beside Gervásio with the same simple grace as always. He would wake up, follow the old man to the porch, lie at his feet while he read the paper, and occasionally perch on the back of the armchair to observe him from above, just like before. The only difference now was that the entire town knew about it, and more than that, they trusted him. So much so that in partnership with the municipal hospital, a new awareness campaign was launched, the Timur Project, designed to educate the public about silent heart attacks. Using the cat's image, the campaign taught early warning signs, symptoms, and prevention. Posters were placed in public clinics, health centers, and supermarkets. On each one, Timur's sharp-eyed face appeared beside the message, "If he could notice it, so can you." The campaign was a massive success. Emergency room visits rose. People began to take mild chest pains, sudden pressure drops, or numbness more seriously. Timur was no longer just a hero. He was now a symbol of care, a reminder that no one should ignore the signs, even if it takes a cat to notice them first. International newspapers began seeking out the city. TV networks from Latin America, Europe, and even Japan sent correspondents. Timur became the focus of documentaries. He was featured in an animated children's short film about friendship and courage, and through it all, Gervásio remained unchanged. He received everyone with humility, always repeating the same phrase, "I have nothing to teach. I only know he stayed when no one else did." Timur, in turn, never left Gervásio alone again. If the old man slept, he lay on his chest. If he coughed, Timur woke up. If Gervásio was slow to get out of bed, Timur watched him with half-closed, alert eyes. No neuroscience could fully explain it. It was love, in its quietest, most relentless form. A love not built in days, but in years of companionship, silence, and a presence. At the local school, a teacher created a class project where students wrote letters to Timur. Some read, "Thank you for saving Grandpa." Others, "You're braver than most adults." But all of them ended with the same request: take care of him forever. And Timur did, not out of duty, but for something far greater. Because in the end, Timur wasn't just the cat who saved a man from a heart attack. He was Gervásio's heart, outside his chest, the guardian, the watchful soul, the living proof that sometimes the one who saves you doesn't speak your language, but understands your soul. The sun dipped slowly over Santa Efigenia that late afternoon, tinting the modest facades with golden tones and stretching shadows. A warm breeze stirred the sheer curtain in the living room, and on the porch of a simple house, the same house where everything was nearly lost and then rebuilt, two beings sat motionless. Gervásio, seated in his old wicker armchair, now padded with new cushions brought by Irina, gazed at the horizon with serene eyes filled with stories. Curled in his lap, as always, was Timur, chin resting gently on the man's chest, front paws crossed, amber eyes calm and fixed on the same point in the sky. No words were needed, no sound, no explanation, just presence, silence, peace. It was hard for anyone passing by that house to imagine what it held inside. There were no plaques of honor, no celebratory banners, no trace of the viral fame that burns fast and fades faster. What was visible was real, raw and eternal. An old man and his cat, a man saved by the impossible, an animal that had surpassed the limits of biology to reach the untouchable. It wasn't a movie, it wasn't an ad. It was life, and that made it all the more powerful. Timur lifted his head briefly and looked into Gervasio's eyes. That deep amber gaze was a mirror of everything they had endured. It carried the days of shared silence, the nights when the man's heart nearly gave out, the dawns when Timur slept over his chest like a blanket on guard. It held the sprints through the streets, the leaps to the window, the desperate scratching of glass, the race against time that only he dared run. Gervásio returned the look with a faint smile. No teeth, no strength, just the weight of a love too vast for words. In that exchange of glances was more truth than most people live in a lifetime, because Timur didn't need promises, and Gervásio didn't need to say thank you. They had said it all to each other in the days when words had failed. The cat's gentle purr was now the new rhythm of the old man's heart. A cadence only they knew. A code written without rules, but sealed with unwavering loyalty. And in that sound, that shared warmth, they healed, not only from the heart attack, but from the loneliness, the abandonment, the invisibility they had both carried for so long. If there had been a camera, it would have zoomed in for one last close-up on Timur's face, half-open eyes, alert ears, peaceful breath. Then it would cut to Gervásio, his fingers gently moving along the cat's back, as if reading a sacred book in Braille. And then, without warning, the shot would rise, pulling up to the sky in a wide aerial view, revealing the quiet street, the humble rooftops, the town now home to a legend. The legend of the cat who heard a failing heart, who broke through windows and rules to alert the world, who saved the man who had once saved him. And before the screen faded to black, only one line would appear. Some hearts don't beat inside the chest. They walk on four paws and wait in silence until you come home.